risk, I have to say, if you look at countries that went through very high inflation rates, the one thing you didn't want to own is cash. The other thing you didn't want to own, that was even worse, were government bonds. And what you wanted to own is actually currencies outside the highly inflating country or highly inflating currency. But if you were in the highly inflating country, then you wanted to be in equities, because they adjusted upwards, the currency went down, and the equity markets went upwards. So at the end of the day, you ended up more or less even. Yes, please?
Yeah, no, there is a measure of risk, actually. You take the central bank and you count how many PhD economists they have from the United States universities. And if the number is high, okay, there's a lot of risk in the country. If the number, because they blow up the country. If the number is low, all right, like in UK, then you have less risk. Simple metric.
Okay. There's another measure of risk, which is called October 2008. Okay, I was very happy being long dollars and being long treasuries, and I was very happy being a million miles away from this place and emerging markets. Yeah, so. Yeah,
like Russia. It's a great place. Russia. I want to be in Russia.
No, there are a number of sides to it, and I think the comment earlier was that the bet on being short treasuries is a bet ultimately on the efficacy of policy in reflating the U.S. economy. And getting, ultimately, if U.S. policymakers can succeed, they will have inflation because they need to inflate away their debts. But there's another reason that one should be defensive on G7 rates, and that is credit. Okay? Greece doesn't trade at 7% now in 10 years because of an inflation problem. They trade there because of a credit and debt problem. And I think this is the idea that sovereign risk is something new is astounding for those of us that make our living investing in emerging markets. So I think that's something that also we need to keep in mind when we think about the risk premium embedded in a 10-year Treasury bond or a 30-year Treasury bond, because you can lose money that way as well. When it comes to emerging markets, I think it's very tempting to say we need to have more exposure to emerging markets, but I think you need to take a very differentiated approach to emerging markets. You can invest in a local market instrument, again, in a place like Brazil, where you have a very, very orthodox central bank that has very high nominal real rates. It's warning about inflation when projections for 2010 inflation are 4.6% and the policy rate's 8.5%. Or you can invest in local rates in Turkey, where the policy rate is 6.5%. Inflation just hit 8.25%, and most people think it's going to hit 10% by the middle of the year, and the central bank says, don't worry, this is a cyclical phenomenon. So I think you need to take a very, very differentiated approach, and certainly within that, there are a number of places that make sense to invest in emerging markets.
Thank you. Well, I'd also like to raise one point. Nobody has talked about geopolitical risks yet. And I think probably World War III has already begun. And so we have to prepare for that, for the time that someone will switch off the mobile phone, switch off the electricity, poison us all, and so forth and so on. And so there are also these personal risks that we have to take into consideration, because it's no good to make a lot of money on the 100 million I gave you if afterwards you can't enjoy it. So I'd like to ask you, how do you see the geopolitical risk playing out between Central Asia, the Central Asian region, where basically Russia has no interest in permanent American bases, China has no interest in bases there, India has an interest to actually continue the conflict, and so forth and so on. Do you have a view on that? And if you have so, is there a good play to make money on it?
It's a very provocative question regarding the collapses, like disconnection from mobile, telephone communications, and gas and electricity. I think that this is the merits of Hollywood, and then we must compliment them on such fearful scenarios, and people believe them, I believe. But certainly one can and one should make money in developing countries. That's quite obvious to me. And for Russia, for instance, the deliveries of raw materials to China is one of the most serious priorities. And you mentioned the development of a mobile network in India, also a huge potential there. I know that the Russian business companies are already present there, and the companies will plan to enhance and increase their presence in this particular market, and certainly one can and one should make money in this area without such nightmarish scenarios that you have just depicted.
So any questions from the participants? Michael, would you like to make a comment? Where? I see. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. The question is about one asset that is somehow forgotten, has been forgotten during 2 days of this conference. It's food. World food, world hunger, world well-being in terms of food. What's the opinion of the panelists on this asset? Maybe it's time to invest, maybe it's time to go out of this asset. Thank you.
If I can just interject there, Marc wrote the best piece on this, so as moderator I think we should ask him to answer this. He basically said at one stage that you should sell everything you have and go and buy farmland. Am I not correct, Marc?
Yes, I think I was alluding to that, in terms of risk, it's risky today to live in large cities, in financial centers. It's less risky to live in the countryside, in the middle of nowhere. And obviously, self-sufficiency may one day again be very important, because if there is an interruption in the supply of water or of food in a large city, then obviously the environment will be very, very difficult. There will be widespread looting and so forth and so on. Whereas in the countryside, at least you can live off your farm more or less. I also think in terms of food, one of the number one issues will be water. And India has 20% of the world's population. In 20 years' time, it will be the largest country in terms of population in the world. It will have by then exceeded the population of China, but it has only 5% of water supplies in the world. So I think if you are considering owning a farm, it would be very important to own a farm in a country that has access to water or very large water resources. And I think there the tensions between China and India could also increase in future. Yes, Nassim?
There are two issues. One is food for inflation purpose, and the other food for breakdown of social order. But as far as breakdown of social order, this is the safest place in the world. And let me explain why. There's a gentleman called after I was here last year, started looking into, why is Russia an interesting place. And there's a gentleman called Dmitry Orlov in Boston who really studied Russia, and he noticed the following. Stalin tried to centralize agriculture and failed. So you have near every city in Russia a source of land. Food comes from nearby villages. So for every calorie of food you have on a table, you have maximum 1 calorie of transportation. Mm-hmm. Take the U.S., much more efficient, much cheaper to produce food relatively. But guess what? For every calorie you have on a table, 9 calories of transportation. All concentrated, a very fragile system. One disruption in the United States, everything falls apart. And that's part of a more general, in the revision of my book, I wrote an essay on fragility of complex systems. System complexifies, becomes more efficient, and then breaks. The world system got more, with globalization, people start specializing in crops, which appeared to be an intelligent thing, except that it does not make things more efficient. Because small shortages percolate through the system in a big time. People control inventory in such a way, which is why, for the first time in history, small imbalance in demand for wheat. Demand for wheat increased by 2.3%, something like that. Supply countered by like 1.25%, something like that. Small imbalance led to multiplication of the price by 8 times. That was so the U.S. is very fragile food-wise. Russia is much more robust because Stalin failed to modernize agriculture.
Yeah,
I think some of the other panel members may have a different idea about where to buy farmland. You like Russian farmland, okay, but I can tell you, I was... I beg pardon?
Stability.
Yes, but I was here in 1981. I can tell you, the markets were empty. They had markets, but they had rotten apples and rotten potatoes. It was all horrible. And so the distribution was also very bad, or the production was very bad. So I would rather have my farm in Argentina, or in Indonesia, or Malaysia, or in the United States somewhere. The farm. How about you, Michael? In South Africa, you have a farm or you live in a city?
No, I'd have mine in Canada, 23% of the world's fresh water.
Very good. Yes, I think that's a very good idea.
Do you think that further consolidation in the food industry, vertical consolidation or integration like we saw recently with Kraft acquisition, etc., makes sense? That those kind of will be the bigger players in the market, global ones, going from transportation to origination to trading to maybe end products, putting it on the shelves, or there should be like more focus on these specific niches in the value chain? Because I saw some contradictions between the gentleman on the panel was saying. Somewhere, some of you were favoring kind of being very local, and some of you, maybe I misinterpreted some of these statements, were favoring the bigger ones. So what's pros and cons?
Hugh, you answer that. You're an agricultural expert as well.
Yeah, I kind of dozed off, actually, sorry. I won't ask you to repeat the question. I'll answer a different question.
The question was...
It's fine. Please. Half of my business, we have an agricultural mutual fund. We invest in agricultural equities. So I should clearly stand in front of you and I should do a marketing campaign and say, I agree, it's a great idea. I think, again, over this get-out clause of the long run, it's a great idea. But to me, just now, it's a risk asset. It's a risk asset. So I have a hedge fund and I have an agricultural mutual fund. So you could say, from a business franchise perspective, I'm hedged. I'm quite comfortable with that hedge. But with regard to my personal capital, I have 99% of my capital in the hedge fund and 1% in agriculture, owing to my great fears again about what happens in a debt deflation. So I won't get bogged down in the detail of agriculture. I think we still have to address some of the broader arching macro issues which define today.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hugh.
Thanks.
Any further questions from the audience?
Yes, good afternoon. I have a question regarding the New World Order. And what I mean by that is a concerted global effort amongst sovereignties, central banks, and fueled by all these organizations that, and I know there's been a lot of U.S. dollars, or a lot of U.S. slamming here, but fueled a lot in large part by the U.S. taxpayer. And in this thing called the IMF. Where would this world be without the IMF? So I was just curious if the panel there could touch on that point. Thank you.
Well, I think, Nassim, you would think the world would be more prosperous without the IMF, I guess. Let me tell you, the last time I had a fit of rage, I took lessons from my mentor here about reacting on stage. I was in Korea, the World Economic Forum in Korea, and I was on a panel like this, and the gentleman came up from the IMF, he's number 2 of the IMF. His name is Mr. Kato, all right? Number 2, all right? He came up, he gave us a forecast of the IMF for 2010. That was last October. So 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. 3,000 people in the room. I mean, I couldn't resist. I went up immediately. I told him, ask him what his forecasts were in 2004, 2005, 2006, and 2007 for 2008 and 2009. And then you realize they cannot be trusted in their forecast. I mean, I spent my time looking at predictions And these things have humongous errors. But